I would like to thank Dr. Hitesh for inviting me here to give this talk. So informed consent, I think Senthil just briefly touched upon informed consent in his talk, and I'll just take it further from there. As with surgery, I think informed consent is absolutely important in research as well. If I was taking part in a research project, I would want to know exactly what is going to happen to me, what are the side effects of that particular intervention, what are the benefits to me in particular, before I take part in the research and before I give my consent. So this applies to surgical consent as well, but it applies to research consent. So what are the elements of voluntary informed consent? So there are two main elements, the information element and the consent element. So whether the full information was given and whether that was understood by the participant, and then whether the participant has the consent ability, legal or actual, and whether he's giving it voluntarily and there is no coercion or force to give the consent. So I'll go through each of these elements with case scenarios. So whether full information was given or not. So here we have a scenario where it's an orthopedic oncosurgeon who deals with osteosarcoma. So he obtains a specimen from a radical excision of osteosarcoma from the knee. He sends it for histopathological examination, which is a standard practice. But there is this new chemotherapy drug that is being introduced to him by a high-profile company that has just finished animal studies, and it looks very promising. So it needs now trials in human cancer cell lines. So this surgeon takes the pathologist in confidence and decides to pursue the trial on the cell lines. Does the surgeon need to inform the patient? And does he need his consent? And what if the surgeon continues with his research without the consent? So these are some ethical questions, and I think this particular ethical dilemma is best explained by this book. So this book is called as The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and it was published in 2010, but the actual thing that happened dates back to 1951, where this lady, Henrietta Lacks, who had cervical cancer, she had this tissue taken out from her cervical cancer, and basically before that time, nobody was able to actually grow the cells in culture. And it was her particular cancer cells that kind of multiplied so rapidly in culture, and they remained alive even till date. We popularly know them as HeLa cell lines. But the problem here was that the surgeon did not take her consent. And there were a lot of issues. So basically she was a black woman, so there were racial issues, ethical issues, all sorts of issues. But the thing is that he did not take her consent, and the cells went on to make a multi-million-dollar business because people produced polio vaccine, or people tested and produced polio vaccine from these cell lines. They did a lot of research, and this particular woman, of course, she died, but her family did not get even a single penny out of the whole multi-million-dollar business. So this book deals with this particular issue very, very beautifully, and I would strongly recommend that people read this book. It was a bestseller in 2010. There's another scenario. So basically, again, all these scenarios date back in the 1950s and the 60s because US has since evolved. So basically, there are elderly debilitated patients who are living in this Jewish chronic disease hospital, and they are injected with live cancer cells to study the immunologic response. And basically, this was a transplant rejection study that was going on. The patients were not informed that they were getting the cancer cells, and because the investigators did not wish to frighten them unnecessarily, and the a priori hypothesis was that these cells would be readily rejected by their treatment. However, many people died from taking part in the study, and then the NIH panel investigated this, and they concluded that the judgment of the investigator is not sufficient as a basis for reaching a conclusion concerning the ethical set of questions. The investigator's judgment must be subject to a prior peer review to ensure an independent determination of risks and benefits. So sometimes a surgeon may think that what he's doing is right, but it may not be. So again, this brings us to the next question. So you give the full information to the patient, but is that enough? And again, this is another case scenario. So surgeon modifies an existing implant for THR with a local implant company. He informs the patient that he is doing this, and patient fully understands the implications of this, and he agrees to take part in this research and agrees for the surgery and gives us full consent. So the THR is performed successfully. However, the implant starts to fail within 3 years. And then within 5 years, there is catastrophic failure. So we know that hips, even with the slightest modification, can fail catastrophically. And there was this very popular implant called Capital Hip in the 1990s, which was a slight modification of the Charnley's prosthesis. And it was, of course, with ethical approval and everything, it was implanted, but it still failed catastrophically within a few years of implantation. So from this experience, we know that it is not just the patient's consent that is important. It is the ethical review board's consent for conducting the study that is also important, because the patient may not be the best judge of all the medical jargon and its implications in the long term. And it is even more important when you're implanting devices in the body. The next part is whether the full information that was given has been understood by the patient. So here we come to the next scenario. There's a 56-year-old male who has presented to casualty with a grade 3A open fracture of the tibia, and he meets all the inclusion criteria for this particular research study that is looking at a novel dressing agent for open wounds that reduces or apparently reduces the risk of infection. So the researcher approaches a patient who's in severe pain and is very anxious, and he presents a 6-page document to the patient and asks him to sign it. The patient who is in so much distress, he doesn't read it, he just signs it and gets on with the treatment. So is this consent really valid? If the new dressing material leads to complications directly or indirectly, is the doctor liable? And so it becomes very important, especially in an emergency scenario when you're doing research, it becomes very important that because the patient is clearly in duress or in pain and anxiety, he may not understand what he's taking part in. So it is very important to check and recheck the understanding of the information by the patient when you're taking the consent. And the responsibility or the onus of this lies with the researcher and not with the participant. And very important again in this particular scenario is that the necessary treatment should not be delayed unusually in the process of research. So many times what happens, and that happens in surgery as well, is we just want to take the signature of the patient without really explaining in detail what is going on. So when you're checking understanding of the information that is given, it is important to really reiterate and recheck with the patient whether he understands what you're telling him. So we all know that, when we talk to someone, even right now when I'm giving this lecture, I think probably around 20% of it will be understood. So many people are listening, but understanding is different from listening. So here we have another scenario. There is a 75-year-old female who only speaks Malayalam, and she's come to Bombay for an elective TKR. Surgeon is doing a research on a wound closure post-TKR, where he wants to compare glue with suture. So surgeon starts explaining the process to the woman. She can barely understand English. She can definitely not read or speak English. She signs the consent forms, thinking it's just part of the process. Later, the patient develops wound infection, and then the family is involved, and family comes to know about this research project, and they sue the doctor. So again, is this consent valid? And isn't it the responsibility of the surgeon to make sure that language is not a barrier when taking consent form? So if the patient doesn't understand English, then the surgeon needs to get an interpreter who can interpret the research process for the patient before the patient actually signs the consent form. Consent ability, I think we all know that the patients have to be able mentally to give a consent form. So this we came across quite often in UK, and I'm sure we come across in India as well. So when somebody is doing a research, say for example in selecting whether bipolar is better or internal fixation is better in intertrochanteric fracture in the elderly neck or femur patients, you will come across a subgroup where they have dementia, and they may not be really understanding what the process or what happens to them when they're taking part in a research project. So basically researcher just takes the signature of the patient, but actually that signature is not valid because the patient has dementia and she doesn't really understand what she's taking part in. So it is important to check the mental capacity of the research participant before you take their consent. Now this also applies to children and when you're taking consent from the parents. This is more of a moral and ethical dilemma, especially in psychiatric research, so we don't come across that much in orthopedics. But always the premise remains is you should not cause or you should try to cause minimal harm to the patient. And the principle of autonomy still stands true even for a mentally incapacitated patient. And lastly, voluntarism. So of course you can't really force a subject to take part in research. But this voluntarism comes in subtly when you're participating in research because research is aimed not at the benefit of the actual participant, but maybe for future treatment it is more valid. Participants may actually be potentially harmed by participating in the research project. Researchers are socially powerful, especially compared to at least the participant. And researcher has a personal interest in the success of the project. So he will try and coerce a patient to take part. And participants have this feeling that if they don't take part in the research project, then probably their future treatment may get affected. So therefore, there's a very thin line between the participant voluntarily participating and whether the participant is being coerced into participating. And the researcher needs to be aware of this thin line. So what about the actual informed consent document? So it should be written in a very simple language. So the recommendation is that it should be at the 8th grade level English, if you're writing it in English. If it's in other languages, again, it needs to be simple. It needs to be translated in and has to be approved in that language before you start the research project. You should avoid any kind of technical jargon or overly complex terms and not make it difficult for the patient to understand. It should succinctly describe the research, and present study details should be in the second or third person, not in the first person. Inform about the potential harm to the participants from taking part in the research project, and include a statement of agreement at the conclusion of the consent document. And avoid inconsistency between the consent form that you're using in the research and what you've submitted to the ethical review committee. So yeah, keep it simple. Don't make it too complicated. If the consent is becoming complicated, you can include a separate patient information leaflet for the patient to take away. So in summary, you should give all the information and check that the patient understands the information. Ensure that the participant has capacity to give consent. There should be no coercion and consent should be completely voluntary. Inform that the patient has a right to withdraw from research without any effect on his ongoing treatment. And keep the consent process elaborate but the document succinct.